stop. Stop being the psychological casualty. You are the fixer, the anchor, the confidant who never breaks. You carry the weight of the world, yet when the job is done, you stand alone, utterly empty. You call this compassion. Jung called it a complex. You have been programmed. Why do you perpetually yield? Why is your default setting compliance? Why do you find limitless psychic energy to manage the emotional chaos of others, but never enough to claim your own space, your own needs, your own demanding ambition? This is not a virtue signal. This is a strategic failure. For decades, the truth about the hyper-empathic individual, the perpetual caretaker, has been shrouded in romantic mythology. Society elevates you. Self-help gurus crown you an evolved soul. They tell you your suffering is a sign of superior sensitivity. That is the lie that keeps you psychologically neutralized. The late manuscripts of Carl Gustav Jung deliver a devastating counter-diagnosis. This is not a gift. It is a highly sophisticated defense mechanism. It is the signature of a childhood psychological causality that forced you to trade your authenticity for utility. Jung's clinical observation is brutal. The so-called empath is not a naturally superior being. They are simply the child who was never granted permission to be healthily selfish, to occupy space, to prioritize their own nascent needs. They are the individual who learned, at a foundational level, that their inherent value was strictly conditional upon their usefulness to the immediate environment. This revelation is the dark truth behind the exhaustion. It is the core dynamic that keeps high-level consciousness locked down. You identify with this pattern. What you are about to read is not therapy. It is the decryption key to your own mind. It is the first step toward true individuation and joining the elite few who operate outside this conditioning. We are decoding the matrix. The common narrative elevates the empath to a mythical status. Jung, the architect of the deep mind, saw past the persona and identified a much more painful truth. Hypersensitivity to the needs of others is not an innate spiritual endowment. It is a psychological adaptation developed in response to a specific, unstable environment during formative years. It is a survival strategy so deeply entrenched that you mistake the cage for your essential identity. To understand how this mechanism operates, how to dismantle it, we must analyze what Jung termed conditional ego development. In a psychologically robust development cycle, the child enters a phase of natural egocentricity. This is not moral failure. It is developmental necessity. It is the period where the child tests boundaries, identifies needs, and learns the impact of their will upon the world. This healthy egoism, this capacity to claim one's space, is the bedrock upon which genuine self-worth is built. It is the prerequisite for later, mature relationships. But for the conditional empath, this essential phase is violently interrupted or punished. Perhaps you grew up managing the emotional volatility of an unstable parent. Your safety depended on anticipating their mood swings, managing their complexes, and preemptively adjusting your behavior. Perhaps you were parentified, forced to assume adult responsibilities far too soon. In any of these scenarios, the implicit lesson was hammered home. Your needs are secondary. Your function is to serve, understand, and adapt. Your value became intrinsically linked to your utility. The behaviors necessary for healthy ego integration, setting boundaries, prioritizing self, occupying space, were coded in your deep mind as dangerous, selfish, and potentially leading to abandonment. You were taught that individuation was a threat to the system. This is the psychological causality. This is why you are always exhausted. Jung observed that children in these high-stakes environments develop an extraordinary capacity to read the environment. They become masters of micro-expressions. They detect subtle shifts in vocal tone. They sense emotional changes before they even manifest openly. This is not cosmic insight. It is a hyper-vigilant early warning system, a sophisticated dark psychology defense mechanism designed to allow the child to adjust behavior and avoid conflict, punishment, or the ultimate psychological threat, emotional abandonment. This hypervigilance is the engine of the empath complex. It is the mechanism that drains your vital psychic energy. Think about your current state. You walk into a room and instantly absorb the atmospheric pressure. You feel the unexpressed resentment between two colleagues. You detect the low-grade anxiety of a friend before they articulate it. You believe this ability makes you highly perceptive. It does. but it also means your ego is constantly deployed externally, acting as a radar for danger, rather than consolidating power internally. You are projecting your own unmet needs onto the world, and then trying to solve them externally by fixing others. This leads us to the core Jungian concept that governs the empath's suffering, the persona of the helper. The persona is the mask we wear for the world. It is the compromise between the individual and society. For the conditional empath, the persona of the helper, the competent, understanding, self-sacrificing figure, becomes grossly inflated. It consumes the ego. You stop being a person who helps. You become help. The danger here is existential. When the persona dominates, the authentic self, the core of who you are, the source of high-level consciousness, is suppressed and forced into the shadow. What goes into the shadow? Not just the morally reprehensible traits. The shadow holds everything the ego refuses to acknowledge or integrate. For the conditional empath, the shadow is the repository of all necessary, healthy traits: self-assertion, righteous anger, the capacity for refusal, and the fundamental right to be self-centered when required. You have internalized the belief that being self-centered is morally bankrupt, but Jung understood that the inability to be selfish is the inability to possess a stable self. The result is a devastating internal split. The persona is perpetually smiling and adapting, but the repressed shadow is seething with exhaustion, resentment, and unacknowledged needs. This internal conflict is what manifests as chronic burnout, the sudden lashing out, and the crushing sense of psychological fatigue. You are spending all your psychic capital maintaining a false front. This is the psychological causality of the empath. The more you give, the more the shadow grows, demanding integration. The resentment you feel when your efforts are unappreciated is not petty. It is the desperate cry of the neglected self, trying to break through the suffocating persona. The path to true power, the path of individuation, demands that you stop romanticizing this complex. You must embrace the nigredo, the necessary darkness of confronting this truth, and begin the brutal work of integrating the shadow. You must reclaim the power of being the main character in your own life. This is the strategic move that separates the psychologically powerful from the perpetually drained. This is the unfair advantage the chosen ones possess: the capacity to look inward and integrate the aggressive, boundary-setting parts of their nature. This is the start of true shadow work. The common person avoids conflict. The elite strategist understands that boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of psychological necessity. They are the ego establishing its sovereign territory. When you fail to set boundaries, you are not being compassionate. You are projecting a repressed fear of conflict, a fear rooted in that early trauma. You are prioritizing the comfort of your persona over the integrity of yourself. The moment you start asserting your needs, the moment you allow yourself to be healthily selfish, you will trigger massive resistance. The people who benefited from your conditional utility will recoil. They will accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, of being not yourself. They are correct. You are finally becoming yourself. This resistance is the confirmation that you are breaking the programming. The persona is dying, and the integrated ego is rising. This is the necessary suffering required for high-level consciousness. You must stop seeing empathy as a passive receiving mechanism and start viewing it as a controlled, strategic deployment of attention. You must learn to turn the radar off. You must prioritize the fortification of your internal landscape over the constant management of external chaos. This is the essence of Jungian analysis applied to power. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge. You must look directly at the suppressed shadow, the part of you that desperately wants to say no, that wants to claim the largest slice, that wants to be aggressively self-prioritizing. That aggressive energy is not evil. It is the raw material necessary to build an unstoppable self. We must shift the focus from being the universal shoulder to becoming the sovereign entity. The next stage of individuation demands radical self-honesty. We need to identify exactly which complexes are draining your power and how they were installed. We need to dissect the nature of the projections you are making onto the world. Are you ready to stop being the casualty and start being the architect? Are you ready to engage in the dark psychology of self-mastery? The path to becoming the 1% is paved with uncomfortable truths, but the reward is psychological freedom and control. The adaptation you developed, the hypervigilance, the radical sensitivity, is not a sign of virtue. It is the architecture of a persona built entirely on conditional acceptance. This persona is your security system, designed to anticipate threats and neutralize them through preemptive service. It is highly functional, often charming, and universally praised. But it is a fraud. This is the core tragedy Jung identified. The more perfectly you wear the mask of the useful, compassionate servant, the further you move from the robust reality of yourself. The ego, mistaking this utility for identity, begins to believe that its survival depends on the continuous performance of this role. But the system is unsustainable. Why? Because the persona requires constant energy to suppress the internal rebellion. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you prioritize an external demand over an internal necessity, you are feeding the persona and starving the self. The exhaustion you feel, the chronic depletion, is not a failure of character. It is the sound of your internal energy economy collapsing. You are running a 24/7 psychic security detail, managing everyone else's emotional reality to avoid confrontation with your own repressed needs. The energy drain is the direct result of the suppressed shadow. If the persona is the compliant, helpful entity, what is its inverse? The shadow is the aggressive, self-serving, ruthlessly boundary-setting part of you. It is the instinctual force that demands space, that claims resources, that refuses compromise. In the healthy developmental phase, this assertive energy is integrated into the ego, providing necessary psychological armor. But for the hyper-empath, this energy was deemed dangerous, selfish, and punishable. It was exiled. The moment you exile power, you lose control. That aggressive energy does not vanish. It simply operates from the basement of your mind, the personal unconscious. It festers, turning from healthy assertion into something far more volatile. This is the mechanism of the complex. Jung defined a complex as an organized cluster of repressed thoughts, emotions, and memories that possesses its own autonomous energy. Think of it as a small, rogue sub-personality operating outside the jurisdiction of your conscious ego. For the hyper-empath, the most devastating complex is often the wounded child complex, powered by the repressed desire for primary care and the rage over unfulfilled needs. When this complex is triggered, which happens every time someone makes a demand, it seizes control of your psychic energy. Instead of responding from a place of conscious choice, you react from the wound. You dive into service not out of genuine generosity, but because the complex is forcing you to reenact the original survival strategy. Be useful or be abandoned. This is not helping. This is psychological causality. We must stop romanticizing this cycle. This is not a spiritual gift. It is a profound cognitive pattern that keeps you trapped. You are projecting your own need for validation, care, and sovereignty onto the external world. You try to fix others because you are desperately trying to fix the original wound in yourself that they reflect. The path to becoming unstoppable requires a confrontation with this exiled power. This is the true shadow work. It is not soft contemplation. It is a clinical and brutal integration of the parts of you that you have judged as too dark, too selfish, or too dangerous. The shadow of the empath is the only thing capable of setting the necessary limits. It is the raw material for building the impenetrable boundaries required for high-level consciousness. The ego must learn to command this power, not suppress it. Imagine your repressed rage, your deep-seated resentment over being perpetually drained. That energy, currently poisoning your relationships and fueling your exhaustion, must be consciously reclaimed. It is the fuel you need to transition from the compliant utility persona to the sovereign self. This is where the nigredo phase begins, the necessary descent into the psychological darkness. The suffering you feel now, the sense of emptiness, the feeling that you are living someone else's life, is the ego's initial resistance to dissolving the old, safe persona. The persona is failing. The old strategy is breaking down. This breakdown is not a crisis to be avoided. It is the necessary chaos required for the forging of an integrated ego. Jung noted that there is no birth of consciousness without pain. The world needs you to be whole, not compliant. The world rewards those who define their own terms, not those who merely react to the terms of others. The goal is to move from being the universal recipient of projections, the dumping ground for everyone else's unmet needs, to becoming the strategic projector of your own will. Look at the chosen ones, the elite, the 1% in any field. They mastered the art of psychological boundaries. They understood that energy is finite, and the highest performance requires ruthless self-prioritization. They integrated their assertive shadow. They learned to say no with conviction, not guilt. The hyper-empath fears this integration because they equate self-assertion with moral failure. They fear becoming the very thing they hated in their childhood environment, the demanding, volatile entity that took up all the space. But Jungian analysis reveals the distinction. Assertiveness guided by a conscious ego is protective and necessary. It is not the same as the reckless, unconscious demanding of a complex. To achieve individuation, the process of becoming a unified, whole, and unbreakable individual, you must stop viewing your deepest emotional pain as a flaw. View it as a diagnostic tool. Your pain points precisely to the areas where the complex is draining power and where the shadow must be integrated. We are not aiming for passive healing. We are aiming for psychological weaponry. We are decoding the dark psychology of self-mastery. The path forward requires two immediate strategic shifts. First, radical identification of the complexes. You must map out the emotional triggers that force you into the service role. When does the panic of potential abandonment override your conscious choice? That moment is the complex firing. Write it down, name it, separate it from yourself. Second, the conscious deployment of the shadow. Start small. Say no to a trivial request. Claim 10 minutes of solitude without apology. Prioritize your own creative work over a friend's drama. The feeling of guilt that follows is the nigredo, the psychological poison leaving the system. Embrace the discomfort. This resistance is the confirmation that you are breaking the programming. This is the shift from the ego defined by utility to the ego versus self relationship defined by sovereignty. The integrated ego serves the self, the totality of the psyche, not the conditional demands of the external world. The true gift of the hyper-empath is not the ability to feel others' pain, but the depth of insight gained through years of intense observation. When you turn that radar inward, you gain an unfair advantage in self-knowledge. This is the moment you stop being the casualty and start being the architect. This process of reclaiming exiled power is the foundation for high-level consciousness. You are not just healing, you are building an impenetrable fortress of the mind. Are you ready to seize the control that was stolen from you decades ago? The time for passive coping is over. The era of strategic self-mastery begins now. The dark truth of the hyper-empath is that your celebrated capacity for connection is the very chain that binds you. You operate under a psychological causality that demands perpetual sacrifice. Society celebrates the saint, but the strategist knows the saint is often the most exploited player on the board. We must decode the failure state. The relentless exhaustion you feel is not merely physical fatigue. It is the catastrophic psychic drain required to maintain a persona built entirely on utility. Carl Jung defined the persona as the mask we wear, the compromise between the individual and society. For the hyper-empath, this mask is forged in absolute selflessness. It is the good one, the fixer, the unflappable pillar. The world applauds this performance. It rewards it with validation, the only currency you were trained to accept. But this persona is a strategic liability. To be the pillar, you must deny every internal tremor. To be the fixer, you must suppress your own brokenness. This denial requires the constant suppression of massive psychological content, the very parts of you that demand space, rage, need, and refusal. This is the exiled shadow. The shadow is not simply evil. It is everything the ego has deemed unacceptable for the maintenance of the persona. For the hyper-empath, the shadow is the healthy, sovereign ego, the one that says, I come first. My needs are non-negotiable. Your drama is not my emergency. You are operating with a psychic debt that accumulates daily. Every time you prioritize another's minor convenience over your own vital rest, you feed the persona and starve the self. This process creates an enormous pressure cooker within the personal unconscious. The energy required to keep these primal, sovereign demands locked down is the source of your pervasive fatigue. You're not tired from doing, you're tired from suppressing. This is the dark psychology of the high-utility individual. You have been weaponized against yourself. The most dangerous moment is when the persona begins to fail. The mask cracks under the strain of continuous performance. You hit a wall. You feel the persistent gnawing emptiness, the void. This void is the absence of the integrated self. It is the realization that the identity you built, the one everyone loves and relies on, is hollow. When the persona cracks, the repressed shadow does not emerge as healthy assertion. It erupts as resentment, passive aggression, or a sudden explosive rage directed at the very people you sought to help. You find yourself disproportionately angry over trivial offenses. You lash out at those closest to you. This is not a moral failing. This is the complex firing. This is the stored energy of decades of self-betrayal finally overwhelming the ego's defenses. You are sitting on a psychological bomb. This is the state of negrito, the blackening, the necessary confrontation with the dark, heavy truth of your own conditioning. Jung taught that we meet ourselves time and again in the form of destiny. If your destiny is always to be the casualty, the exhausted resource, it is because you are projecting the shadow onto the world and onto others. Think about the people you constantly attract, the emotionally volatile, the perpetually needy, the energy vampires. Why are you the only one who can save them? Because you are projecting your own need for rescue onto them. You are attempting to heal your exiled, wounded child by fixing their external problems. Every time you successfully manage their crisis, your ego gets a temporary fix of validation, confirming the utility-based persona, but the core wound remains untouched. The true chosen ones are those who have the courage to retrieve these projections. The hyper-empath's radar, that extraordinary ability to detect subtle emotional shifts, is not meant to protect others. It was developed to protect you from abandonment or conflict. Now it must be turned inward. That radar is your most powerful tool for Jungian analysis and strategic self-mastery. You must map the operational logic of your internal system. Why does the thought of setting a boundary trigger immediate crippling anxiety? Because that anxiety is the voice of the wounded child, screaming, "If I stop being useful, I will be cast out." This is the complex governing your life choices. To enter the 1%, the realm of true psychological sovereignty, you must consciously deploy the shadow, not in destructive chaos, but in strategic assertion. The first step of shadow work is acknowledging the legitimate existence of the selfish self. You must give that part a voice, even if only internally. What does your shadow want to say to the person who just demanded your time? It wants to say, "No, I am busy building my own kingdom." This is not about becoming cruel. It is about becoming whole. Cruelty is the indiscriminate lashing out of the wounded shadow. Sovereignty is the precise, intentional use of boundaries, powered by the integrated shadow. When you start saying no to the external demands, the internal resistance will be immense. You will feel guilt, anxiety, and a profound sense of loss, as if you are betraying your entire identity. This discomfort is the psychological poison leaving the system. It is the negrito transforming into the foundation of your new power structure. Embrace the feeling. It confirms you are breaking the programming of conditional value. The ultimate goal is the alignment of ego versus self. The old ego served the conditional demands of the outer world. The new integrated ego serves the self, the totality of your psyche, your true potential. This is the shift from being the exploited resource to being the strategic master of your own energy. This is not healing. This is a high-level consciousness upgrade. You are reclaiming the power that was stolen from you in childhood. You are transforming your greatest vulnerability into an unstoppable weapon of self-determination. The path to individuation is paved with the necessary destruction of the persona that keeps you small and useful to others. Stop being the emotional reservoir for the world. Start demanding your space. Start building the fortress of the mind where your sovereignty cannot be breached. This is the only way to move from psychological causality to conscious design. This is the dark truth that unlocks true power. This is where the theoretical architecture of the psyche collides violently with the reality of your life. We have established that your hyper-empathy is not a spiritual trophy, but a sophisticated psychological defense mechanism, a persona built on conditional value. But where does the energy you suppressed, your natural aggression, your healthy selfishness, your legitimate need for rest, go? It does not dissolve. It becomes weaponized. The repressed shadow is a volatile complex, always active, always demanding expression. Since your conscious persona must maintain the illusion of being the selfless helper, the shadow cannot be expressed internally. It must be projected outward. This is the mechanism of psychological causality that keeps the chosen ones trapped in a cycle of resentment and exhaustion. You despise the traits you deny in yourself. The individual who operates at a high level of consciousness understands that perception is projection. The empath, however, has perfected the art of strategic self-deception. To maintain the purity of the persona, the shadow, the demanding, boundary-setting, occasionally ruthless part of you must be located in others. This is the dark psychology that binds you. Observe the people you most frequently criticize or resent. The colleague who aggressively negotiates a higher salary while you silently accept less. The friend who demands emotional support but vanishes when you need them. The family member who unapologetically occupies space and prioritizes their pleasure. You label them narcissistic, entitled, or toxic. You are not seeing their true character. You are witnessing your own exiled power. You are projecting your abandoned shadow onto them. You are condemning the very strength, the ability to say mine and no, that you desperately need to achieve individuation. Consider your professional life. You are the one who stays late, who fixes the errors, who takes on the emotional labor of the team. You believe this is ethical superiority. Jungian analysis reveals a deeper, more painful truth. You are unconsciously trying to earn the validation that was denied to you in childhood. You are performing utility. When the promotion goes to the assertive, strategically focused individual, the one who didn't exhaust themselves on low-leverage tasks, you feel betrayed. You categorize them as morally inferior, but they are merely integrating the ego traits that you have pathologized and exiled into your shadow. This is the strategic error of the empath. They waste immense energy policing the external world, judging others for their perceived selfishness, rather than integrating the necessary selfishness required for their own psychological survival. The cost of this constant projection is staggering. Every time you point the finger, you reinforce the false persona, making the integration of the shadow more difficult. You are fighting phantoms, and the battle drains the exact resources needed for high-level consciousness. The true path to becoming one of 1%, those who genuinely control their destiny, requires the voluntary retrieval of this projected energy. This is the essence of shadow work. It is not a gentle process of self-discovery. It is a brutal confrontation with the parts of yourself you deem unforgivable. You must sit with the realization that you have the capacity for callousness. You have the potential for ruthlessness. You are capable of strategically manipulating situations to prioritize your own well-being, even if it causes mild discomfort to others. This confrontation is the negredo, the necessary psychological darkening. Most people retreat from this stage, preferring the safety of the good persona, even if it means perpetual exhaustion and exploitation. They would rather be the victimized saint than the sovereign master. This is where the strategic advantage lies. The integrated shadow is the hidden power of the chosen ones. When you stop projecting your ruthlessness onto the external world and own it internally, a profound shift occurs. You stop seeing boundary setting as an act of aggression and start seeing it as an act of precise psychological sovereignty. The moment you reclaim the drive, the ambition, and the selective focus that you previously criticized in the successful, that energy becomes available to your ego. This is the upgrade. You move from being the reactive, compliant resource to being the strategic architect of your environment. The highest form of empathy is not serving others until you collapse. It is achieving a state of complete self-possession so that your interactions are based on conscious choice, not unconscious compulsion. A person who is exhausted and resentful has nothing genuine to give. They are simply paying a psychological debt. The integrated shadow allows you to establish the necessary fortress of the mind. It provides the psychological armor that repels intrusions and demands. This is not about becoming cruel. It is about becoming unbreachable. We must decode the practical application of this sovereign power in your relationships and career trajectory. In relationships, the empath often operates under a cognitive pattern that dictates, if I give enough, I will finally be loved unconditionally. This is the repetition compulsion of the wounded child. When the partner inevitably fails to meet this impossible demand, the empath projects their resentment and disappointment onto them, seeing them as ungrateful or emotionally stunted. The integrated individual, operating under Jungian analysis, recognizes this pattern. They understand that their internal void cannot be filled by external utility. They shift their focus from giving to defining. They use their reclaimed shadow energy to enforce boundaries, communicate needs without apology, and tolerate the discomfort of the other person's disappointment. This tolerance for external disappointment is the metric of your newfound freedom. When you demand your space, when you prioritize your rest, when you refuse to absorb the emotional chaos of others, the persona screams betrayal. People who relied on your compliance will recoil. They will accuse you of being exactly what you feared: selfish, cold, distant. Let them. Their reaction is merely the evidence that the old contract, the conditional value system, is being shredded. Your willingness to endure their judgment is the final test of your sovereignty. This is the moment you transition from psychological causality to conscious design. The path to high-level consciousness is marked by the acceptance of necessary conflict. You cannot transition from being the emotional sponge to being the strategic master without shattering the expectations of those who benefited from your weakness. This is the ultimate shadow work, embracing the power to disappoint others in service of the self. This is the prerequisite for true power, true control, and the only way to genuinely join the 1%er, those who prioritize their internal architecture above external approval. You must become dangerous to the expectations of the crowd. You must become unstoppable in chaos in your self-determination. You have accepted the conflict. You have decided to endure the judgment of those who benefited from your psychological compromise. But awareness is only the first trench. The war for the self you are is fought on the external battlefield of your daily life, and the weapon you must master is the precise identification of Iman, projection. The denied aspects of your psyche, your legitimate anger, your ambition, your desire for unilateral control, the healthy egoism you never permitted yourself, do not vanish. They are exiled into the your shadow, and like any suppressed energy, they seek expression, but they do so indirectly. They are externalized and placed onto others. This is the hidden cost of the conditional persona. You are leaking power. Look at your professional environment. Who do you secretly despise? Is it the colleague who is ruthlessly efficient, the boss who demands without apology, or the entrepreneur who seems to possess an unstoppable confidence? You label them arrogant, selfish, or manipulative. You see them as the problem. But in the framework of Jungian analysis, the intensity of your reaction is the measure of your internal denial. The traits you condemn in the ruthless are often the very tools required for true leadership and success within the 1%er. You project your denied ambition onto them, allowing them to carry the psychological burden of being the bad guy, while you remain the virtuous martyr, the indispensable, exhausted helper. You cannot access your own latent aggression and competitive drive because your persona forbids it. So, you resent those who use the necessary force to move the world. This is not moral superiority. This is psychological cowardice disguised as virtue. Are you criticizing the player or the game piece you refuse to pick up? This mechanism is the core of Jung, dark psychology, applied to self-sabotage. You condemn power externally because you fear the responsibility of wielding it internally. You remain safe in the role of the victim, the perpetual giver, because that role guarantees conditional love and avoids the existential risk of true self-determination. Now, examine your personal relationships. The conditional empath, the one whose value is tied to utility, inevitably attracts individuals who perfectly match their deficit. If you have suppressed your need to receive, you will unconsciously seek out partners or friends who are masters of taking. They are the emotional voids, the chronically needy, the dependents who confirm your identity as the indispensable source of emotional energy. You are not attracting these individuals by chance. You are attracting them through a psychological causality that demands the completion of a complex. You project your unmet need for care onto them, hoping that by giving them everything, they will somehow reflect back the care you need. This never happens. They cannot give what they do not possess, and more critically, your persona will not permit you to receive it even if they could. The dynamic is fixed. You remain the helper. They remain the dependent. And the deeper you sink into the role of the giver, the more desperate and resentful you become. This is the psychological inegredo, the necessary darkening. You are trapped in a self-constructed prison, convinced you are serving others when in reality, you are serving a fragile, conditional ego structure. The dark truth is that your empathy is not a boundless resource. It is a highly sophisticated defense mechanism that ensures you never have to fully occupy your own center. The path to genuine de-individuation demands a brutal inventory of these projections. Every time you feel intense frustration, resentment, or judgment toward another person, you must stop and ask, what part of my rejected Zhu shadow is that person expressing for me? If you despise the selfishness of a colleague, you must embrace your own right to be selfish. If you resent the laziness of a partner, you must reclaim your right to rest and demand space. If you condemn the coldness of the elite, you must integrate the necessary emotional detachment required for strategic mastery. This is not merely therapeutic introspection. This is the deconstruction of your self-imposed limitations. This is how you access the hidden power locked within the rejected parts of your being. Jung observed that the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of its parents. For the conditional empath, the greatest burden is the unlived life of the yourself, the life you denied in order to maintain the persona of the good, compliant, useful person. To become unstoppable, you must stop being useful on demand. The strategic shift required is the radical realignment of the ego versus self. Your persona ego has been focused on external validation. The high-level consciousness required for your chosen ones is focused entirely on internal congruence. This means shifting your primary loyalty from the expectations of the external world to the deep, authentic demands of your own self. What does the self demand? It demands wholeness. It demands integration. It demands the integration of the shadow, not its continued exile. It demands that you move from a state of psychological causality, reacting to patterns, to a state of conscious design, creating your own patterns. When you refuse to project your power onto others, something profound happens. They are forced to confront their own voids. The dependent partner must finally learn self-sufficiency. The demanding colleague must find a new emotional sponge. Your withdrawal forces them into a necessary confrontation with their own undeveloped aspects. You are not abandoning them. You are granting them the dignity of their own struggle. And in doing so, you are achieving your own sovereignty. This is the real work of the Bao, shadow work. Realizing that true compassion begins with the preservation of your own psychological architecture. You cannot illuminate the world if your own light source is constantly being drained to power the lives of others. The ultimate measure of your success in this transition is not how many people you help, but how many people you allow to be disappointed by your boundaries. If you are not upsetting anyone, you are not setting strong enough boundaries. You are still operating under the old contract. To join the ranks of the truly sovereign, those who master their internal world, you must embrace the fundamental, non-negotiable truth. You must become dangerous to your own history. You must dismantle the psychological patterns that kept you safe but small. You must tolerate the accusation of being selfish, because that accusation is the sound of your we ego finally aligning with the self. This is the prerequisite for control. This is the blueprint for the chosen ones. This is the only way out of the emotional exhaustion and into genuine sustainable power. This transition, from psychological utility to psychological sovereignty, is the most brutal phase of anti-individuation. It is the moment you cease being a supporting character in everyone else's drama and claim the role of the main character in your own life. When the persona, that perfectly crafted mask of selfless utility, is finally challenged by the boundaries you impose, the world will react with fury. People who depended on your lack of boundaries will accuse you of betrayal. They will try to guilt you back into your old patterns. This is not personal. It is the natural resistance of the complex. Your withdrawal destabilizes their equilibrium. This reaction is the crucible. This is the the dark confrontation that Jung spoke of. You must withstand the emotional pressure. You must tolerate the discomfort of being disliked, misunderstood, or deemed cold. Understand this. The feeling of guilt you experience when you prioritize yourself is not a moral compass. It is the residual programming of your childhood contract. It is the internal voice screaming, if you stop being useful, you will be abandoned. You must silence that voice. You must commit to the deeper truth. Your value is inherent, not transactional. The true goal of shadow work is not just integrating the darkness, it is achieving psychological wholeness. When you integrate the repressed needs, the desire for space, the right to say no, the ambition to focus solely on your own ascent, you stop being a fragmented personality constantly leaking energy. You become contained, you become formidable. This is the hidden power of the integrated psyche. Most people believe consciousness is about being nice. They are wrong. High-level consciousness is about precision. It is the ability to see the operational mechanics of the human mind, your own and others, without being emotionally manipulated by them. The conditioned empath was always reacting to the environment, adjusting the persona to minimize conflict. The integrated individual, the true initiate of Jungian analysis, acts from the self. They choose their engagements. They move with surgical intent. You are no longer a responder, you are a creator. This radical shift in perspective is the defining characteristic of the 1%, not in wealth, but in psychological mastery. They have mastered the art of selective engagement. They understand that their energy is the most valuable resource on the planet, and they guard it with ruthless efficiency. The dark truth of this process is that you must become an emotional capitalist. You must invest your attention only where the return on psychological health is highest. Every interaction, every commitment, every request must pass a strict internal audit. If it drains you without contributing to your individuation, it is malpractice to accept it. How do you maintain this elevated state? By understanding the deep structure of the ego. Your ego, previously conditioned to serve the utility persona, now has a new master, the self. The self is the blueprint for your potential wholeness. When the ego aligns with the self, it stops seeking external validation and starts executing internal necessity. This is the psychological causality in action. When your internal architecture is strong, your external reality molds itself around your boundaries. You are no longer pushed by the demands of others. You become the gravitational center that pulls the necessary resources and opportunities toward you. This is the difference between a high-level consciousness and a low-level reactive pattern. The reactive pattern is dictated by fear of abandonment. The high-level consciousness is dictated by the vision of the integrated self. When you achieve this integration, your empathy does not vanish. It transforms. The conditioned empath felt everything and was paralyzed by it. The integrated individual feels deeply but operates strategically. You can now choose to extend genuine compassion, a conscious, deliberate act of support, without sacrificing your own foundation. You have transitioned from being a psychological victim of your past to becoming the architect of your future. You were not put on this earth to be a perpetual emotional battery for the undeveloped egos of those around you. You were placed here to realize your own potential, to manifest the unique totality of your calm self. This is the ultimate confrontation. This is the final level up. You must stop confusing suffering with virtue. The exhaustion you felt was not a sign of spiritual superiority. It was a symptom of an unintegrated shadow and a dysfunctional persona. Freedom is found in the ruthless pursuit of wholeness, to become one of the chosen ones. You must choose yourself first. This is not an act of arrogance. It is the necessary foundation for all authentic power. You now possess the analysis. You have the map to the deepest structures of your own mind. You understand the hidden mechanism that kept you bound to a cycle of depletion. The path of dark psychology is simply the path of clear-eyed reality, accepting the difficult, uncomfortable truths about human motivation, and using that knowledge not to exploit others, but to fortify yourself against exploitation. The greatest psychological weapon you possess is not your capacity to understand others, but your unyielding commitment to understanding and protecting yourself. Do you have the courage to apply this knowledge? Will you tolerate the discomfort of setting the boundary? Will you allow yourself to be called selfish while you build the fortress of your own self? This is the point of no return. You cannot unknow this truth. You now hold a knowledge that the vast majority of people ignore, a knowledge that gives you an unfair advantage in the psychological landscape of the modern world. Your journey into genuine, unstoppable power begins the moment you decide to permanently retire the persona of the conditioned empath. The time for being the shoulder everyone cries on is over. The time for building the life you were meant to lead defined by your own terms, is now. If this analysis resonates with the deep truth inside you, if you are ready to dismantle the psychological chains of your past and step into the ranks of the truly sovereign, then you must align yourself with those who think on this level. Click the subscription button now. Activate the notifications. We exist to provide the blueprint for the ego versus self conflict and guide you toward high-level consciousness. This is not self-help. This is self-mastery. 1. The dark truth of empathy. Hypersensitivity is not a divine gift, but a sophisticated survival mechanism developed in childhood to manage volatile environments. 2. The shadow work. Imperative. True power requires integrating the repressed, selfish needs. Your boundaries are not optional. They are the prerequisite for psychological sovereignty. 3. Ego versus self-alignment. The transition from a conditional persona to the integrated self is the path to becoming one of the chosen ones. 4. The weapon of sovereignty. Genuine compassion is strategic and deliberate, not reactive. The ability to say no without guilt is the ultimate expression of high-level consciousness.